I say, I'm from Northwoods and the Northwoods Innovation Programme specifically. And Northwoods is a platform to support and develop innovative approaches to woodland management with the specific aim of helping bring more woods into management. And we're doing three things, and we've been running over the last it's coming up for 3 years now. But through these 3 years, we've done a lot of demonstration and sharing of tools, methods, knowledge around woodland management and different topics associated with that. And that's been in person at networking events, webinars such as this evening. We also have case studies and a newsletter where we share kind of up-to-date news, information to do with the sector to support woodland owners and also managers and those that work and live in woodlands look after their woodlands better. We're supporting other people with great ideas to help manage woodlands, and part of that is the development of specific tools. So we've worked very closely with the Silver Foundation and the development of their My Forest platform. My Forest is an online mapping platform where you can map and manage your woodlands all in one place. And they've developed specific applications and developments that help woodland owners using My Forest over the last 3 years. They've developed geospatial maps, which means you can now plot in real time features in your woodlands. They've developed and improved their My Forest inventory function, so you can now more easily record information on the trees you have in your woodlands, have a digital database. And at the moment, and it's due out very shortly, it's something we're very excited on, they're developing kind of a standardized sales brochure to help woodland owners and managers bring woodlands through to management and to market as well. So that's something that, as I say, is in the pipeline. They've been working very hard on, and we are looking to sharing more about that shortly. Ultimately, we're trying to re-establish Northwoods as a woodland initiative and forestry support sector programme in the northeastern Yorkshire region. And we're supported, the programme itself is supported by a range of organisations working together. So it's funded by the Forestry Commission's Woods Management Fund, and it's hosted by Reheat. So I work at Reheat, but we're also supported by others, including Martin Glynn, RDI Associates, we mentioned the Silver Foundation, and also Timber Auctions. And together, we're delivering this package of support until the programme itself, the innovation programme, is running specifically until March 25, but there'll be ongoing information available on Northwoods following that as well. And just quickly, a little bit of background. So it's a regional programme. We're based up in the Yorkshire and North East, and the programme's come about because there are currently 76,000 hectares of unmanaged woodland in the region. And if a very small proportion of these were brought back into management, it would release a significant amount to the rural economy, but it would also result in extensive environmental and social benefits. And that's what programmes such as the Northwoods programme are trying to achieve, working in collaboration with other projects and other initiatives in the region. And that's where we come in and we work with David. So David's running his own project looking at managing squirrels. I'll let him introduce it a bit better than I will in just a second. But we're working with other stakeholders and other groups and initiatives to try and create a connected sector in the northeast and in Yorkshire, looking at woodland management and how we manage for nature, as well as timber and the range of environmental and social benefits that woodland provide. So without further ado, I'll hand over to David. Thank you.
So hopefully everybody can see and hear. My name's Dave Adams. I work for the UK Squirrel Accord. Just going to try and change this slide. I'm a project officer, one of 2 project officers for the UK Squirrel Accord. I've had lots of previous lives and experiences, like a lot of people that's probably here tonight. Previously taught countryside management at one of the local agricultural colleges, and I'm also a volunteer up in Northumberland. I'm not sure what it's like where you guys are today, but it's starting to get wet and windy here. We'll see what the weather brings in the next 24 hours or so. So for this presentation, I'm going to be talking about and trying to get us to think about grey squirrel management for red squirrel conservation. I'm not going to be looking at damage to trees, woodlands, ecosystems, etc. I've already covered that in the previous webinar. If anybody's interested, you can find it online. But many of the principles of management are going to require some of the same considerations. So although there is some overlap, there are some specifics with managing greys in red areas. For those that don't know anything about the UK Squirrel Accord, it's a partnership of 45 different organisations, and I'll show you some of those in a moment. Organisations, government departments, agencies, companies, they've all got links to red squirrel conservation or woodland management. It's a collaborative process where hopefully everybody gets to say what they feel should be in management plans, etc., for bringing red squirrels through this troubled time that they're in. And it has two main objectives. One is to secure and expand red squirrels and push beyond their current thresholds. And the other one is to ensure that UK woodlands are going to flourish very much in the same direction as Northwoods to benefit wildlife and future generations. There's a website that you can find a lot of information about what the UK Squirrel Accord is about. So these are some of, well, all I think now, yeah, I think this is an updated version of some of the organisations that are involved. I'm sure you recognise many, many of them and may be part of them. The project I'm involved in, as I said, I'm a project officer. It started in March of last year and is due to finish in March of this year. And the aim is to try and encourage and engage woodland owners, the agents, any stakeholders and members of the public to get involved in either grey squirrel management, red squirrel conservation, and we're trying to help and encourage them to carry out landscape grey squirrel management control. We also aim to train and recruit volunteers, form groups that will carry out grey squirrel management beyond the length of this project. What I'm not here to do today is to try and tell you how you should be doing things in your areas. As the slide says, I'm not here to try and teach your granny how to suck eggs. I understand that there's a lot of work being done with various organisations, and I've just put a few up on the screen there. There's many different organisations involved in red squirrel conservation. These are typical of the types of organisations that you'll find, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens. I think in Cumbria, Northumberland and southern Scotland, there's upwards of 50 different voluntary organisations. So it's a widespread network out there, and I would imagine lots of the people on here tonight are involved in some way in those areas. But as I say, I'm not here to preach to the converted or push things forward. It's to start that conversation with you guys. Sometimes, I don't know about yourselves, but we find having to try to justify what we do in managing grey squirrels. And the snippet at the top here is the type of thing that we hear, and we're constantly bombarded with things, especially on the internet, Facebook, etc., about why we do these horrible things, the cruelty that we inflict. So at times I found myself having to justify to other people, especially members of the public, people that don't understand the plight of red squirrels and the impact that grey squirrels are having. I find myself trying to explain what I do, trying to justify it. And I did find this book, Colour of the Wild, an interesting and important book, and I recommend that to anyone that is also sometimes asked, why do we do what we do? What is it? Is it because we're enjoying inflicting pain and cruelty, or is it, you know, another reason that we do it? And I found that a useful book and recommend it. We also get asked quite a lot of the time, is it necessary to cull grey squirrels? Surely these contraceptives and vaccines and that are available. Well, as you probably know, the contraceptive is a potentially viable tool in the toolbox, but it is yet to be developed fully. It may take as long as another 5 to 10 years to have something that we can use in the battle to save red squirrels. It could be that it's going to take that length of time to get all those parts of the jigsaw puzzle put together. They're working very hard, and I've visited sites where some of this research is going on, and there's a lot of money, time and effort being put into it. And it is likely that the contraceptive will be available, hopefully sooner rather than later. And it's going to be a tool in the toolbox. It might not be the silver bullet that we're all hoping, but it's definitely going to be a tool that hopefully will help to push back that tide. There's a lot of discussion about vaccines, and there's a push at the moment to try and get a vaccine to use against the squirrelpox virus. Again, I think research has been done, but again, it's going to cost a lot of money to push that forward. Money that is probably not available at the present moment in time. I think from my point of view, a lot of what I do and what I've tried to do in the past is to try and educate people. And the comment above about the cruelty we inflict and the ignorance that we have, it doesn't stand up if you do your research and do the reading and look at it logically. So education is a big part of what we're trying to do within the project, within the UK Squirrel Accord, and within some of the groups that we've already had a look at. This is a question I'm quite often asked: can red and grey squirrels coexist? And this is part of the argument that I use when I'm confronted by people. I've done lots of public events, public meetings, and pop-ups where you will try and engage with the public and talk about the struggle between red and grey squirrels. These are some of the things that I keep coming back to time and time again in that discussion, in that argument for control. We know that there's a competition for resources between red and grey squirrels. They're after the same food types, they're after the same habitat resources, they're after those tree cavities, those nuts and seeds. We know that greys can be more aggressive, they're bigger and stronger, they're more adaptable, and they've got a massive competitive edge against our native reds. We also know that there's disease transmission. Grey squirrels can carry squirrelpox virus, and we've recently had an outbreak in the northeast. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Cramlington in that area, and they've had a squirrelpox outbreak. And this has had a massive effect on their local populations. They've been finding quite a few dead squirrels. This can limit their ability to coexist. This is going to be one of the main reasons why they can't coexist. We've already said they can be aggressive in their behaviour. I've seen greys chasing reds before. They're going to outcompete them in many, many ways, and being bigger and more aggressive is one of those ways. There is a time when reds and greys can coexist, but eventually reds will lose out, either through disease or competition. Red squirrels will lose that battle. I'm sure many of us are familiar with this map, and it's recently been updated to give a little bit more of an insight. And it's a snapshot of what might be going on, and it doesn't drill down to tetrads and things like that, but it gives us a general idea of feeling what's going on. Obviously, the earlier maps, 1945, etc., showed a good coverage of red squirrels. As time goes on, the grey areas get larger and larger. The red areas start to shrink. But there's been an interesting development, especially in Ireland, if you compare the different photographs, where reds are making a comeback. In certain areas in Scotland, like Aberdeen, they're making a strong comeback. And again, that's through volunteer work and rangers putting the time and effort in these areas. Cumbria and Northumberland don't look as good on this map, the new modern map. There are areas there where greys are being seen more and more. There's definitely a change there going on. Part of the recovery in Ireland is down to, they think, the recovery of pine martens. And this is a controversial subject in many areas where there are red squirrels. And I think it's going to be a case of time will tell in the mainland as to what kind of impact pine martens have had on recovery. There are some very small, fragile populations that people fear the introduction of pine martens might see off. And I think it's a difficult one, and it's one that we all need to take account of, because especially in the north of England, pine martens are definitely on the move. They're coming down from the north, from Scotland and the borders around the Kielder area, and they will be making inroads into what we see as red squirrel zones and reserves. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops as time goes on. I'm sure we'll have some questions and some discussion about that afterwards. So which traps can we use in red squirrel areas, or what techniques? And this is something that's puzzled me a little bit as to what is a red squirrel area, a zone or a stronghold or a reserve. So a red squirrel zone often refers to an area where there's conservation efforts are being focused and put in to protect those red squirrels. The RSNE, Red Squirrels Northern England, they recommend a 5 kilometre buffer zone as a minimum around these areas, these strongholds. But bear in mind that red squirrels can move up to, and it's suggested, over half a mile up to over a mile in a single night. And greys can travel much further than that, perhaps up to as much as 2 miles in one night. So when I was thinking about putting this presentation together, I was trying to think of what that might look like. So we have different zones within our red squirrel conservation areas. There may be a zone in the middle where there are red squirrels are predominantly based, but they may have in grey squirrel incursions. And there is then a buffer zone around it. And beyond that, it may be a grey area only. And I want you to think about that as I put the next slide up, because in reality, it wouldn't look anything like that target. It would probably look something like this. And I've just taken a map of an area that I've been working, and I've tried to think about how those zones might look. This isn't an accurate map. It's just something that I wanted to try and put down to show that those zones obviously aren't circular. And a lot of this is about knowing your topography, knowing your ground, knowing where those populations are. And I think that's going to be vital and key in some of these areas. Knowing your ground is an important aspect. One of the areas in Weardale that we've started, we're trying to map some of the reds and greys within that zones. And this picture on your right hand side is a squirrel that we didn't know was in the woodlands. And it was a woodland owner that had asked for some advice and asked if I could come and have a look at their woodland to see if they had any squirrels in it. When I went, we found obvious evidence of squirrels, but again, we weren't sure if it was red or greys. We put a camera up and we caught this image. And as you can imagine, the landowners were delighted that they had red squirrels there. But then it did bring up a few problems, because also captured on the screen at another time was a grey squirrel. So we were then able to think about managing, putting a management programme in to try and remove those grey squirrels. And the landowner's been quite happy to get involved in that and do the work themselves. Let's not forget that it's illegal to intentionally or recklessly kill a squirrel, so we have to be very careful about what we do and where we do it. We can't set traps that are likely to cause bodily injury to any of these animals in the schedules 5 and 6, which includes obviously red squirrels. We can't damage their shelter, their tray, or if it's a tree where they're using to lay up and produce young, and we can't disturb it when it's occupied. It goes without saying that we can't sell or offer for sale live or dead red squirrels without the relevant permissions. And there are some stringent penalties should we be caught foul of these, up to £5,000, 6 months imprisonment, and confiscation of equipment used. I know that for some poaching offences, vehicles have been removed alongside equipment used illegally. So for the most part, a lot of the traps that may be available, kill traps, can't be used in certain areas to manage grey squirrels. That's not to say they can't be used for other species, as some of these traps are often used for other mammals. But from our point of view, for taking grey squirrels, within those zones where we know there are reds, you shouldn't really be using any kind of kill traps whatsoever. But remember, we're not the only ones that are using traps for wildlife management. If you're regularly out and about, you'll come across gamekeepers, farmers, foresters, etc., who are using traps for different forms of wildlife management. Again, I think it's imperative that we try and engage with these people that are out and about in the countryside, like ourselves, that work the land, that own the land, and engage with them in useful conversations. And again, it may be a case of trying to educate them about the type of things that they're doing, which may infringe that Wildlife and Countryside Act. One of the traps that are regularly used in areas such as I live are rail traps. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with them, but it's usually a plank or a tree log or a pole laid across a ditch or a watercourse, or maybe a breach in a wall, and it's a crossing point for predatory species. And in the photograph here, you can see that there's a cage mounted around a fen type trap. There are occasions when people use these types of traps and don't have them in the correct kind of cage, or allow other animals like squirrels, as you can see in this photograph, to enter them. And really there's no excuse for this, and a lot of it is down to education. Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust can give advice on this, and they say that rail traps shouldn't be used in or around woodland where there are red squirrels present resident. That would make the events that we've just seen on the previous slide, that just wouldn't happen. If they are going to be used within these areas, you need to think very carefully about where you're putting them. You need to think about the type of trap. You need to think about excluders, and if it's possible, is there another method of trapping the animals you need to trap? Or if you have to trap grey squirrels, then use catch alive traps as they recommend. There's no excuse really in this day and age. There's lots of information out there. Again, in red squirrel areas, if there's a chance that a red squirrel is going to be caught in a live cage trap, you shouldn't be using multi-catch cage traps. There's a variety of those on the market, and it goes without saying that if there are reds and graze in an area, and a red and a grey somehow became entangled in one of these multi-catch traps, that the red would suffer tremendously. So we're left with single live catch cages like the one above. These traps have been used extensively in red squirrel areas, and it is a live cage trap, as you can see, and if there is an animal in there that shouldn't be in there, be it a red squirrel or a bird or some other mammal, a hedgehog, etc., then that animal can be released immediately. But we need to still think about some of those trap protocols. And the first thing I would say is get some training, or at least get a good mentor. There's been people involved in this kind of work for many, many years, and they know probably all there is to know about trapping squirrels. If you can't get a good mentor, get some good training. We need to think about the needs of that trapped animal. So unlike the photograph just before there, we need to have some kind of protection from the elements, wind, rain, etc. We really need to have some food in there. And there's some people that are arguing that we should be thinking about putting some kind of water in there as well. I'll leave that up for discussion. If it's on the ground, make sure it's pegged or tied down. I've heard many, many reports over the years of traps disappearing, only to be found again in areas where other mammals like badgers and foxes, etc., have picked them up and tried to take them away. If we've got those traps out there, we need to be checking them regularly. In a red area, at least every 4 hours is a recommendation. Elsewhere, at least twice a day. Think about the weather conditions when you're using these live cage traps. Is it too hot or too cold? Have you got it in the shade, or is it standing in the direct sunlight where a trapped animal might overheat? And think about some of the remote monitoring equipment that's out there. There's several different types on the market now, remotely being one, spile point trail cameras, etc., where they'll give you an instant recording of what's in that trap, if it's been triggered, etc. There's lots of new monitoring techniques coming along, and technology's coming on so quickly. The one on the left is an acoustic monitoring device, which will pick up the difference between red and grey squirrels in a woodland. The one on the right is the new squirrel agent, which is being developed with help of volunteers to try and identify both red and grey squirrels, and they've had some great success with that. It may be that these technologies are going to lead on to more equipment that would lend itself to identifying something either before or while it's in a trap. And there's a big push to try and incorporate this technology into some trapping equipment, which will be a benefit, a wider benefit. If we're going to put feeders out and think about putting cameras on and things like that, we need to think about the impact that supplementary feeding has on populations. And there's lots of recommendations out there, and I recommend anybody to start having a look through them. Things like, instead of keeping those feeders topped up all the time, feeding every 3 or 4 days, so you're not having those red squirrels relying on that food source. We know that during the summer months, things can be difficult, especially for breeding females. So it may be that you're going to think about when you put supplementary feeding in there. And make sure these feeders are kept as clean as possible. Quite often we don't think about that. There's lots of other things like dermatitis and adenovirus that can be passed on between squirrels and between humans and squirrels. So try and keep those feeders as clean as possible. Use gloves when you're topping up feeders. Take them away to be scrubbed thoroughly, at least once a month. but have something on hand that you can disinfect those feeders if you're going around feeding, hopefully every 3 to 4 days. Remember about where we put these feeders, and cats and dogs can account for lots of fatalities in gardens, especially. I was talking to a lady last year who has feeders in her garden, and she pointed out that one of her dogs is particularly interested in the feeders and the squirrels, and it had unfortunately killed 3 red squirrels in the time she had it. I did suggest that she needs to think about not feeding squirrels in her garden, or certainly keeping the dogs away from any areas. But this is a common occurrence. It's also quite common that we pull squirrels out of areas, out of woodland areas, across roads, etc., to feed in gardens. So again, it's another consideration. If we are going to feed, we should be thinking about things like hazelnuts in the shells, sunflower seeds, beech nuts, etc. And if we are going to feed peanuts in small amounts, unsalted ones, and remember that they can become toxic if left. So if we're filling them up with peanuts and going away for weeks on end and not bothering, they will potentially become toxic to squirrels. They're also going to eventually potentially give them a calcium deficiency if they're eating a lot of them. So we need to think about, if we are supplementary feeding, leaving something alongside there like cuttlefish and antlers, etc., and apples and carrots to try and replenish some of that calcium. So as far as shooting grey squirrels go, as another method of control, some things are out to start with. Obviously, dray poking, which is a popular pastime and method, a traditional method of control, that's out of the question. If there's any chance that a red squirrel may be in or around a squirrel dray, it's a no-no for obvious reasons. Other methods, like using air rifles, etc., are, however, quite acceptable. There's an interesting case study about using air rifles as a method for humane and lethal control. And I recommend anybody that is interested in that to get hold of it and read it. That's by Braithwaite and Dutton. And I think air rifles and their use in grey squirrel management have come a long way. Obviously, you can't use them on all areas, and you can't use them in public areas without permission, etc. And as long as you follow certain rules, then they are an effective and useful tool in that box. Just going back to the case study there, it was found that using air rifles gave extremely effective method to suppress numbers. However, as often the case with what we're talking about, the grey squirrel management in red areas, the financial burden and running costs are usually carried by the person that's carrying it out, and not necessarily by the landowner, the woodland owner, or the estate. And one of our advocates for volunteers produced documentation as to how much is spent by volunteers in the pursuit of managing managing grey squirrels for red conservation, and it goes into the hundreds and hundreds of pounds. In fact, for some people, especially those that are using equipment like air rifles and thermals, etc., it can run into the thousands of pounds. If you are going to shoot at feeders, it is usually done with air rifles, but some people also use live rounds, 2.2 and 177s. Sometimes they use a 410 shotgun. It's often from a high seat or a hide, and it can be very seasonal when other food sources are available. So even though you put your feeders out, it may be that other food sources round about are more attractive. What I will say is that you need to be checking feeders regularly and removing greys frequently. And trail cameras can be very, very useful to observe activity around feeders. Woodland stalking is another method where something like a thermal on the left here can be used to spot squirrels, and then either air rifles or shotguns then can be used to dispatch them. What I will say is that one thing missing from this photograph is a pair of binoculars. We often see both red squirrels and grey squirrels that look very, very similar. So identification is a must, and thermal identification is just the first part of that hunting, stalking session. A good pair of binoculars will definitely tell you if it's a red or a grey squirrel. So there's many people engaged in grey squirrel management that aren't interested in red squirrel conservation. They may be doing it for tree protection. It may be householders that are having problems. It may be gamekeepers that are having trouble with squirrels raiding hoppers and damaging equipment. And it may be the sport and shooting community. And as the title suggests on the slide, we need to engage with all people that we can in the help to save what little and small populations we have left of red squirrels. So landscape control, finding out who your neighbours are, finding out what else is going on around you is extremely important in that fight. I mentioned training before, and there's lots of good training out there, and I recommend that you look around and find something that's suitable for your needs. If it's basic trapping training, or whether it's more specialised for shooting training, there are organisations and qualifications out there which will help you and your team, your volunteers, to become competent. And I recommend everybody seeks out that training. There's lots and lots of information out there. It's needless to say there are books and technical notes, and there's lots and lots on YouTube, and any Google search will bring up lots and lots of information. So in conclusion, I'd say carry out as much research about movement of squirrels in your areas. It's not going to be that target approach where you only have certain control methods going on in certain areas. You need to find out where your reds and greys are, and then decide amongst yourselves where and which tools and methods are going to be best to be used. And I would still recommend you must get some quality training, even if it is from mentors with lots of experience, or more formal training. Certification can help to get insurance and knocking on doors. If you can show that you're a competent person and it's carried out training, then it may be that it will open doors where other things can't. Try and get on with those neighbours, find out what's going on, and carry out landscape control where possible, and embrace the new technology that's coming along. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we will have some questions.
Thanks, Dave. That was a very clear presentation. Are we getting feedback from me? No, I think we resolved that. Very clear, measured presentation, as you know, we've come to know from you. So thank you very much. I've just popped a link to the Squirrel Accord, but also to the previous webinar that Dave hosted back in November, looking at managing grey squirrels to improve woodland health. So I'd encourage you to watch that back if you weren't there at the time. If you have a question, can I ask you either to raise your hand? For me, it's at the hand button at the top of the screen. I know others might have it at the bottom, or you can pop a message in the chat, which is the speech bubble to your right, and we'll invite you to either unmute yourself and ask the question, or I can read the question out if it goes in the chat. I think everyone's still thinking and digesting, Dave. So I'm going to ask you a question, although you covered off lots of the questions I would have asked anyway towards the end. So if I was looking for a mentor, where would you suggest I should go? You provided lots of information about where to get training, but where can I find a mentor?
I think this is something where red squirrel Northern England or Northern red squirrels comes in, where there are lists of different groups within certainly Cumbria, Northumberland, and hopefully in some of the other areas now in Yorkshire and Durham, where we are trying to get people organised. But that would probably be a first port of call, getting involved with the local red squirrel group. I think one of the problems, and we get inquiries from people who are outside of the project areas, which I forgot to mention are Durham, Lancashire and Yorkshire. Outside of those areas, it's more difficult to get that information and to find mentors, because basically there probably aren't groups. There's lots of individuals working alone. There may be friends working together, but there's not groups as such. So I would encourage people to find like-minded people within their areas.
And if they're looking to establish a group, what would you recommend the steps they take?
But certainly within the areas that the project's working, Lancashire, Durham and Yorkshire, you can come to the project offices. We've still got time to put things in place before March. As I say, it's a 12-month project. We're hoping that funding will carry the project on, but time will tell with that one. But other organisations like BASC and some of the other stakeholders, the wildlife trusts, may have some information in your particular area.
That's useful, thank you. And Peter Malden asks, are there UK government grants available to support grey squirrel control?
There are if you're a woodland owner. And again, it's something that is going through, because of the new government, lots of things are up in the air, and funding is one of those. So the funding for grey squirrel management is again being looked at, and it'll probably be in a very similar form to it is now, although that's not a guarantee. But at the moment, it's £60 a hectare for woodlands in the higher TS stewardship. Again, whether or not you or your woodland would qualify for that, you'd have to apply to the Forestry Commission for those grants. But there are grants available if you're a woodland owner, yes.
If you are a woodland owner and you're not certain about the about how to go about either looking to understand if you're eligible or how to apply, I'd encourage you to get in touch with your local woodland officer, and you can do that by going on the Forestry Commission website and finding their contact details there. So that's the first port of call I'd recommend. We haven't got any other questions that have come through just yet. So I was hoping we could touch a bit more on training. You obviously put up some training courses towards the end of your presentation. Could you just talk through what the training normally consists of, how long it takes, any costs associated with it typically, and the variety of different courses?
So there's lots of different ones available. So Lantra, who you probably are aware of, for land-based courses, produce, well, they don't produce, but they oversee a few grey squirrel management courses. Some of them, as I say, are more specific to certain aspects. So British Red Squirrels runs a Lantra accredited course where you will get certification, and that would cover all the different aspects of trapping and management, the reasons for how to do it, etc. There are other specialised courses. There's one runs out of Longtown up in Cumbria there, which is specifically for air rifle shooting for red squirrel conservation. I've been on both of the courses, and they are quite specific for your needs. But I would recommend you do your research. People like BASC are also doing courses. National Gamekeepers Organisation are doing courses. Up in Scotland, you will find different legislation. I must say that I'm talking about England here. They have different trapping criteria, etc. in Scotland. So there's lots of things out there. And as I say, if you can find a good group with mentors, then that is another good way of finding your way into learning the skills that you need.
Thank you. Peter has asked his follow-up question. You mentioned how far squirrels can move at night. So during one night, you mentioned is it 1 to 2 miles, I think you said, that they could move. How far can they move during the day?
Well, yes, you're right. I suppose that's in a 24-hour period, shall we say. I think it surprises people that squirrels can be quite active at certain times of the day and night. I know from trail camera footage that I've seen, they can visit feeders and areas at strange times of the day and night, times that you wouldn't think that they'd be active or moving around. So yes, I see there's a little bit of a wink there, but yes, I would say that's within a 24-hour period in a day and evening.
Thank you. My next question was around populations and monitoring populations, and you obviously provided, a range of ideas around different technologies about how to monitor populations. But if someone was looking to survey local populations and then keep a specific database around the population and its change over time, hopefully years, what time of year would you recommend kind of taking larger scale kind of population surveys, and then for how frequently would you recommend to kind of monitor that population size?
I think it certainly so all these things depend on your areas, obviously. If you're just moving into an area that you're a little bit unsure of, you've got red squirrels in one area, but you'd like to expand that, then a spring survey where so it's probably twice a year, a spring and a summer survey. Sorry, a spring and a winter survey. Certainly when there's no leaves on the trees, you can see drays, etc. But if you're moving into an area, you can start putting feeders out potentially and putting up camera traps, trail cameras to try and find out what's going on. So I would say twice a year, yes, spring and winter, or summer and winter. But certainly I would start now. If I thought there were reds or grey squirrels in an area, I would start now by putting up trail cameras, etc. I know that Red Squirrels Northern England do a survey once a year, and they get a lot of information. But again, it's large tetrads. They're not specifically saying they're in this wood or that wood. It tends to be in an area as such. But from a conservation viewpoint, you really need to know where squirrels are and where they're moving around.
And if you do collect data, is there a central collection point that you can feed that data into? Would it be worth sending into the UK Squirrel Accord, or is it just something that you keep track of yourself?
Again, Red Squirrels Northern England would be quite happy to receive some of that information, and Northern Red Squirrels as well, which is the local groups. So if you're in a specific area, find out who your local group is, and giving information to them could be very valuable, especially if it's a red that hasn't been seen in a certain area for some time.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question in the chat from Scott Dallow. He asks, how would the different ecological roles of red and grey squirrels impact ecosystem services such as seed dispersal, pollination, etc.?
Well, they have a very similar role. Obviously, there's a lot more, potentially a lot more grey squirrels than red squirrels. So as a seed dispersal tool, then both squirrels perform that alongside lots of other animals, mammals and birds. I don't know if there's any research being carried out that I know of that would say that grey squirrels are that much of a benefit in seed dispersal and ecosystems, etc. There's certainly a lot of information out there to say they're detrimental. Grey squirrels, again, are detrimental to trees, forestry and ecosystems. And I don't think that balance would play out in their favour as a tool for seed dispersal. I don't know if that makes sense. I think they probably cause more harm than good.
But they fill very similar niches in terms of
very, very similar.
Dispersal.
Yeah, obviously densities would be quite different.
Yeah.
Grey squirrels can live at much higher densities than red squirrels.
Thank you. We have Philip with his hand up. Philip, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello. David, do you know of anyone who's successfully encouraged pine martens into a red and grey area to control the greys?
I think there's evidence, and I made the mistake of saying anecdotal evidence on the last one, and I was pulled about it. I think there's certainly research and evidence going on in Ireland as to how red squirrels are impacted by by pine marten, either reintroduction, stroke, expansion, and I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see how it's going to work on the mainland. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of difference between the type of topography and the number of people and, you know, lots of other different things, woodland makeup, etc., or whether or not it's going to have a similar impact that they've seen in Ireland. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think it's going to be very positive. Obviously, they've both grown up together, evolved together, both pine martens and red squirrels. So I'd like to think that it's going to be of benefit to both species. I think time will tell. And I think in the meantime, some people are quite concerned about some of those small population of red squirrels in their areas specifically. And I know this has been a constant theme of discussion in Cumbria where they've been reintroduced. Northumberland is quite different in that respect, in so much as they're moving south, as it were, from Scotland. So it's going to be an interesting one, Phil. I think it's going to be a case of watch this space. They're definitely coming if they're not already here, and it's a wait and see, I think, of how they're going to impact red squirrel populations. What's your thoughts, Phil?
Well, we are looking at introducing some in the west to control the greys. There's no reds nearby, and there's no pheasant shoot.
Right.
So they're quite happy to rewild and introduce the martens there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot more introductions go on as well.
We might have to do some research on it as well.
Well, I think there's certainly research going on in Yorkshire as to boosting populations. And as you know, there's been reintroductions in places like Dartmoor and what have you. So it's definitely on its way and it's coming. And there was a chap on the TV, I don't know if you've seen him, who's been quite openly releasing beavers and voles and all sorts. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's other actors like that in the, I'm just going to say conservation world, if you want to, in our world that are doing just that. So they might be popping up in surprising places, to be honest.
Oh, good, thank you.
Thanks, Phil and Dave, as well, for that interesting discussion. Joanne has chipped in on the chat, and it's quite an interesting point. They've got 5 acres of mixed woodland in Dumfries and Galloway, and have both red squirrels and pine marten, and they've recently had a grey squirrel turn up. And she says that she hopes the grey squirrels are taken care of by the pine marten, but actually they're now looking to manage the grey squirrels to I suppose reduce any risk where the natural predation doesn't take care of it to manage that population. So it's quite an interesting one to try and watch and see what happens with the populations where you have got other control measures taking place. So it's really interesting.
I think the worry with that situation is if a grey squirrel moves into a red squirrel area, potentially they could spread squirrel pox. So it may be that if you don't control those greys as and when you find them, that you'll lose your reds, and the pine martens, for whatever reason, will have to then, because there's obviously pine martens do kill red squirrels. That's part of what they do. But if you've got a strong, healthy population of red squirrels, it shouldn't impact them in the same way as if you had a small, struggling population. So I would, if I was in that situation, I would manage greys and not leave it to things like pine martens and goshawks and things like that. That's
and that seems to be what they're going to do. So it sounds like that's following the right advice there. We've probably got time for one more question, if anyone has any. I think, it's been quite a wide-ranging conversation, and I think your point around very early on around engaging with the public and with others is, it's something that everyone in conservation, has to be very good at, because there are often questions asked. What's your top tip? If any of our attendees are out managing squirrels and they come across someone that starts questioning them, what's your top tip when trying to get the message across around what they're doing and the benefits of what they're doing?
I think there's some people out there will never be able to convince with the research and the arguments, etc. So in some respects, you've just got to stand back and nod your head and move on. But for the majority of the population, they don't understand that struggle that's going on. So educating yourself about that struggle and getting some good arguments tucked away there for when you do meet these people when you're out and about on your travels is the best thing. And I do recommend that Colour of the Wild. It was something that I've read recently, and it's made, sometimes we get very focused on species and we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, but sometimes we need to kind of think about the other side of that argument and how other people perceive it. And that was one book that's kind of helped me to understand that. So get yourself educated and do a little bit of reading.
Thank you. I know, there's a similar piece trying to happen in, in forestry as well, in terms of managing trees and the benefits of managing trees. So it's, it's a constant piece, but if people are, and most people that do these activities are fairly enthusiastic, I think, about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And, passionate people are probably the best people to be spreading messages. So it's good to be, as you say, educated, and then also trying to engage where people are interested, and trying to share knowledge around what's going on and how it's improving the resilience in the environment. We don't have any more hands up for any last minute questions. And we haven't got any more messages in the chat, although I would just highlight that Julie, Dave's colleague, has said that the impacts of pine marten on red and grey squirrel management are unproven in an English landscape context. And she has put some capital letters in there. So I wanted to make that point just very briefly before we wrapped up. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate it. I hope you've got lots of things from it, whether it's a new book to read, or some practical tips and advice, or other resources to go and check out at later on this evening or next week. So thank you again for attending. We do have some more webinars. Northwoods has some more webinars over the next couple of weeks, and you can find more information where you sign up to this one. So on Eventbrite, we're looking more at woodland inventories and measuring trees and timber, with the anticipation of Silver Foundation's release and launch of their kind of standardized sales brochure on the My Forest platform. So that's what we're looking over the next couple of weeks to share and speak more about. So please do sign up if you haven't already. And the last thing I'd say is we do have an evaluation form that will be going out this evening and again tomorrow. We really appreciate your feedback and your comments, and particularly with Dave's programme coming to an end, and also the Northwoods Innovation Programme coming to an end. Any comments or feedback you have is really helpful for us to go back to summarise the impacts of our projects, and to hopefully see some more support moving forward. So I would just say, please do take the time to provide some feedback. And finally, Dave, thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.
It's been really interesting, and as I think I will go and find Colour of the Wild to go and read that. So thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you.
And good night, everybody.
Good night.